The hum of machinery filled the dimly lit command center, interrupted only by the soft tapping of Rael Harper's fingers against the console. His eyes, bloodshot from days of constant vigilance, flicked between the screens, scanning tactical maps, fleet positions, and intelligence reports. Earth's final line of defense had been reduced to a single fleet, the remnants of humanity's former strength. The Empire was closing in, its forces overwhelming and relentless. Rael. The voice of Elena Cross cut through the silence, low and steady. She approached, her expression grim but resolute. As Earth's chief engineer, Elena was the genius behind the Supercarrier, humanity's last, desperate hope. The ship was a colossal structure, buried deep beneath a hollowed-out asteroid, hidden from Imperial eyes until now. Its awakening had sparked new life into the once-defeated humans. He turned to face her, trying to mask the weight of his thoughts. "What's the news?" he asked, his voice hoarse from too many hours without rest. "Empire's fleet is less than 2 days away," Elena said, pulling up a holographic display of the enemy's approach. "We've got maybe 24 hours to get this ship operational. Less if we don't move quickly." Rael's heart sank. The Supercarrier, while powerful, was still an untested relic. The fleet that had once been Earth's pride had been decimated in the first wave of the Empire's invasion. And now they were out of time. "Is it even ready?" Rael asked, his voice tight with the strain of what was coming. The question had been plaguing him for days. Elena gave a small nod. "It's ready enough. We'll have to work through some bugs, but it'll have to do. We're past the point of no return." He turned back to the console, his fingers tapping out a series of commands. The Supercarrier's systems blinked to life, a slow awakening, like a beast rousing from a long slumber. The hum grew louder as the ship's core powered up, and Rael felt the briefest flash of hope. It wasn't enough, though. No matter how many weapons the Supercarrier boasted, no matter how advanced its technology, Earth's military was still vastly outgunned. The Empire's fleets were near invincible, and the weight of humanity's survival rested on his shoulders now. "Elena," Rael said, his voice firmer now. "Can we win this?" The engineer stepped forward, the flickering hologram of the approaching Imperial Armada casting a pale glow over her face. She met his gaze, her eyes full of quiet determination. "We don't have a choice. We'll fight, and we'll make them regret ever underestimating us." Rael's lips twisted into a grim smile. He could see the fire in Elena's eyes. She wasn't just fighting for Earth's survival, she was fighting for the future. And that was something worth believing in. Outside, the stars seemed cold and distant, but Rael knew they were about to change. He looked at Elena, his resolve solidifying. "We'll make them regret it," he echoed. "Humanity doesn't back down." Just as he turned to give the command to launch the Supercarrier, the console beeped, a shrill warning echoing through the room. "Incoming transmission, Empire flagship, Admiral Vale." Rael's breath caught in his throat. The Empire had already found them. "Put it through," he ordered, his voice low. The screen flickered to life, revealing the face of Admiral Vale, a cold, ruthless leader with eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Captain Harper," Vale's voice dripped with condescension. "You truly believe you can stand against us? You have no place in this galaxy. Your species is doomed." Rael's gaze never wavered. "We'll see about that." The transmission cut off abruptly, and the tension in the room thickened. Outside, the stars were no longer distant. They were a battlefield waiting to be won. The Supercarrier shuddered as it broke free from the asteroid's hollowed depths, its massive engines igniting with a thunderous roar that vibrated through the entire ship. Rael Harper gripped the console, eyes locked on the monitor in front of him. The Empire's fleet was closing in. No more hiding. He took a breath, steadying his nerves. "Launch all fighters. Prepare the torpedoes. Activate the shield generators," he ordered, his voice cutting through the growing tension like a knife. Each command was a thread being woven into the fabric of humanity's survival. The ship's systems hummed to life, and the control room buzzed with a sense of purpose that hadn't existed in years. Earth's defenses were about to face the might of the Empire. Beside him, Elena Cross stood with her arms crossed, watching the countdown clock with focused intensity. Her face was a portrait of determination, yet there was an edge of fear lurking in her eyes. She had built the supercarrier, but even she knew that it wasn't enough to face the oncoming storm. "We're not ready for this," Elena muttered, more to herself than to Rael. "The systems aren't fully calibrated. The power grid's unstable." She glanced at the displays, her lips tightening. "And there's a massive hole in our armor. We're exposed." Rael's gaze didn't falter. He knew the risks. "We'll make it work," he said simply. "Humanity doesn't have the luxury of perfect. We adapt. We fight." Elena shot him a look, her eyes narrowing with skepticism. She knew what the stakes were better than anyone, and despite the flickering doubt in her voice, she nodded. "Fine. We fight." Outside, the massive supercarrier tore through the inky void of space, its sleek silhouette silhouetted against the distant glow of stars. It wasn't just a ship, it was the embodiment of Earth's final stand. Every inch of it screamed of humanity's defiance. "Admiral Vale's fleet is in range," reported Commander Myers, the ship's tactical officer, his voice calm but laced with the gravity of the moment. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the looming shadow of the Imperial flagship. It dwarfed the supercarrier by comparison, its dark hull bristling with weapons and shields that made the Earth's ship appear fragile in comparison. But Rael wasn't looking for fragility. He was looking for a chance. "Deploy fighters. Launch the torpedoes on my mark," he commanded, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the massive fleet that now filled the screen. The ship's massive guns hummed with energy, their power building to a point of critical mass. "Mark," Rael muttered under his breath, his heart pounding. The supercarrier's weapons lit up the void like a storm unleashed. The first volley of torpedoes shot forward, cutting through space with deadly precision. Fighter ships swarmed in formation, dancing around the Imperial vessels with surprising agility. A massive explosion erupted as one of the enemy's destroyers was hit. The energy shockwave rippled through the blackness of space. "We've made a dent, but they're retaliating," Myers said, his voice strained as enemy fire lit up the tactical readouts. The shields flickered, and the ship groaned as it absorbed the incoming blasts. Rael clenched his jaw. "We'll need more than that to break them. Keep pushing. We're losing shields," Elena shouted. "Rael, if we don't recalibrate." "I know," he snapped, cutting her off. "Do what you can. We hold this line, no matter what." Outside the control room, the distant clangs of impact reverberated through the hull as the Empire's retaliatory strikes battered the supercarrier. The tension in the room was palpable, thickening the air as each crew member fought to keep their vessel intact. A sudden blare from the console interrupted Rael's thoughts. A new signal. The Imperial flagship was moving closer, its massive weapons targeting their ship. They were out of time. "Elena, get to the reactor core," Rael ordered urgently. "We need a power surge now. It's our only shot." She hesitated, her expression torn between fear and resolve. "You're asking me to overcharge the core. It'll blow if we don't control it." Rael's eyes locked on hers, the weight of the decision clear in his gaze. "If we don't do this, we're dead anyway." Elena turned without another word, her mind already working through the calculations. The ship's heartbeat echoed in the silence of the control room as Rael's hand hovered over the command button, ready to push the supercarrier to the limits of its power. For a brief moment, all was still, save for the pounding of his heart and the quiet hum of the ship's systems. Then came the roar, louder, fiercer than any of them had expected. The supercarrier surged forward, faster and more powerful than ever before. But the Empire was waiting. The supercarrier buckled under the relentless assault of Imperial fire. Rael gritted his teeth, watching as the outer shields flickered and collapsed in a series of violent sparks. The ship groaned, its massive frame shuddering with each impact. His hands flew across the console, barking orders to the crew who were still struggling to manage the sudden onslaught. "Hold her together!" he shouted. "Keep the weapons online. Full power to the aft shields. Elena had made it to the reactor core, her mind already working in overdrive. She had calculated the risks. Overloading the core could either turn the tide of the battle or annihilate them all. There was no middle ground. Back in the control room, Rael glanced at the display showing the Imperial flagship drawing closer. It was like a beast closing in for the kill, its weapons charging in deadly synchrony. He could feel the ship tremble beneath him, but the weight of the decision ahead weighed on him heavier than any blast. "We're running out of time," Myers said, his voice strained as the screen displayed the trajectory of the Imperial flagship. "We're outgunned, Rael. They're locking onto our engines." Rael took a slow breath. His mind raced, but he wasn't ready to give up. "Elena?" His voice crackled over the intercom. "I'm ready," came her reply, cold and calculated. Her fingers danced over the console, adjusting the reactor core settings with precision. Sweat slicked her brow, but there was no room for hesitation. "We'll need a miracle," Myers muttered, glancing at the rapidly descending countdown. Rael's jaw tightened. "We've always been our own miracle." He turned to the tactical console, issuing the next order without a second thought. "Fire everything we've got." The Supercarrier's weapons came to life. The bridge trembled as a massive burst of energy shot forward, striking the Imperial ship with a stunning force. The display briefly flickered as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The flagship's shields crackled under the barrage, its engines shuddering. Rael allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. But it didn't last. A sudden jolt rocked the ship as Elena's voice echoed over the comms, strained with urgency. "Rael! We're at critical mass! I can't hold the core for much longer!" Rael's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" But before he could finish, the intercom cut out with a sharp screech. "Get Elena back here, now!" Rael snapped, his pulse racing. "That core can't hold much longer. We need to stabilize it, or we're dead." Myers was already scrambling, fingers tapping frantically on the control panel. "We're losing power to the forward weapons, sir. The shields are gone." "Damn it!" Rael slammed his fist into the armrest of his chair. There had to be another way, there had to be something left in their arsenal. His gaze flicked to the monitors, then back to the Imperial flagship, looming ever closer. The thought hit him like a lightning bolt. If they couldn't destroy the flagship, they could at least slow it down. He turned to Myers with newfound resolve. "Open the aft hangar bay doors. I need all of our remaining fighters prepped for a desperate strike." "But Rael, that's—" "Do it, Myers!" Rael's voice brooked no argument. Myers hesitated, but then nodded, recognizing the man's determination. "Aye, sir." The hangar doors rumbled open. A swarm of fighters shot out into the void, streaking toward the Imperial vessel with a trail of fiery vengeance. The fighters darted in and out of enemy fire, some falling away as explosions engulfed them, but others reached the flagship's hull. A few well-placed strikes landed, but the flagship's reinforced armor barely budged. As the last of the fighters disappeared into the black, Rael felt his heart sink. They had done what they could, but it wasn't enough. The enemy was closing in too fast. In the reactor core room, Elena was fighting against time. Her hands were slick with sweat, the control panel flickering as she tried to stabilize the rapidly heating core. She had made the calculations again and again, but now there was no time to double-check. It was all or nothing. "Hold on," Elena whispered to herself, as if the ship could hear her. "Please!" Outside, the Imperial flagship was only a few miles away. Then, the intercom crackled. "Rael, we have a problem." The air was thick with the acrid scent of burning circuitry, the sound of alarms blaring through the Supercarrier's corridors like a constant heartbeat. Rael paced the command deck, his thoughts frantic, his mind running through a dozen failed scenarios. Elena's voice had cut out, and his chest tightened at the thought. He could almost feel her presence in the reactor room, sweat on her brow as she fought to keep the core from detonating. If she failed, they all failed. His fingers tightened around the cold metal railing beside him as the Imperial flagship loomed ever closer. The darkness outside the reinforced glass was suffocating. But there was no time for hesitation. Rail straightened, forcing the fear from his mind, replacing it with cold resolve. He had a crew to protect. He had a fleet to save. "Commander," Myers called out, his voice tinged with desperation. "We're at 10% power. The flagship is almost on top of us. If we don't come up with something soon, we'll be nothing more than debris." Rail turned slowly to face Myers, his gaze unwavering. "We've survived worse, Myers. We can survive this." "Survived worse?" Myers' voice rose, disbelief mixing with his exhaustion. "You're telling me this is just another day at the office? We're staring down the most advanced warship in the galaxy with a ship that's barely holding together." Rail's jaw clenched, but his voice was steady. "We may be outgunned, but they're underestimating us. They don't know what humanity is capable of." At that, Myers fell silent, and Rail could feel the weight of his words sink in. It wasn't just the ship at stake now. It was something far larger. A war, a future, the survival of a species that had been pushed to the brink. Rail wasn't about to let that fall apart in the final moments. "Can we reroute power to the forward weapons?" Rail asked, his mind already racing through tactical options. Myers hesitated before tapping furiously at the console. "We can try, but without full shields, any offensive strike is a death sentence." Rail exhaled sharply, his mind rapidly calculating. The Imperial ship wasn't just large, it was intimidatingly well armed. But it also had a weak point. Every ship did. His eyes narrowed as the answer appeared before him. He had one shot. One chance to break the stalemate. "We're going for a direct strike," Rail said, his voice low and full of purpose. "Full power to the forward engines. Aim at the center of their shield grid. Elena, I need you to overload the reactor now." His words echoed through the intercom, and he could feel the collective breath of the bridge crew hold as Elena's voice crackled through the calm. "You're asking me to overload the core while we're still under attack? You want to blow up the entire ship, Rail?" Rail's eyes never left the Imperial flagship. "We don't have another choice. If we don't do this, they'll tear us apart anyway. You're the only one who can make it work." For a moment, the comms were silent. Then, Elena's voice came back, steady and determined. "I'll do it. But if this goes wrong..." Rail allowed himself a brief, tight smile. "It won't go wrong. We have you." As the crew scrambled to execute the plan, Rail felt the ship shudder beneath him. Power surged through the ship as it accelerated toward the enemy. Every fiber of his being told him to run, to find another way. But there was no time for that. He had to trust Elena. The supercarrier shot forward, engines roaring in defiance. The Imperial flagship's weapons were already locking onto them. A hail of energy blasts exploded around them, shaking the ship to its very core. Rail's heart pounded in his chest as the countdown to impact began. Then, Elena's voice came through the comms again, steady as ever. "Ready when you are." Rail didn't hesitate. "Now!" The ship lurched forward with unimaginable force as the reactor core overloaded, sending a violent shockwave through the entire vessel. The lights flickered, the hull creaking under the strain. But Rail felt it, the shift in momentum, the rush of adrenaline as the supercarrier broke through the Imperial defenses. The flagship's shields buckled. And for the first time in the battle, Rail allowed himself to believe they might actually win.